He's blind. We can't raise a burden. My son said about his baby. We dropped him at a shelter, nothing you can do. I walked out and spent years saving money and searching for his records everywhere. My son thought I'd moved on. Then one day, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Marjorie, and I am 67 years old. I thought I had seen the worst of human cruelty during my lifetime, but nothing prepared me for what my own son would do to his newborn baby on that cold February morning. The call came at 5:30 in the morning. Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, was in labor. After years of trying to conceive, they were finally having their first child. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, dreaming of holding my first grandchild, of being the grandmother I never had the chance to be with anyone else. I rushed to St. Mary's Hospital, my heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. The corridors smelled of disinfectant and floor wax, and the fluorescent lights cast everything in a harsh clinical glow. I found Ronan pacing outside the delivery room, his face pale and drawn. "Mom," he said when he saw me, relief evident in his voice. "The baby, there might be complications." My stomach dropped. "What kind of complications?" He ran his hands through his hair, the same dark brown hair he had inherited from his father. "They think the baby might be blind, some condition they detected during the delivery." I felt my breath catch in my throat, but not from fear or disappointment. I felt protective, fiercely so. "Blind? Well, we'll figure it out. There are resources, specialists. We'll get through this together." Ronan's expression shifted, becoming cold in a way that chilled me to my core. "No, Mom, we won't." Before I could ask what he meant, a nurse emerged from the delivery room carrying a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. My grandson. My heart swelled as I reached out my arms, but the nurse walked past me directly to Ronan. "Congratulations, you have a beautiful baby boy," she said with a warm smile. "He's perfectly healthy otherwise, and the doctors want to discuss early intervention options for his vision." "We don't want to discuss anything," Ronan interrupted, his voice harsh. "We're not keeping him." The nurse's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. He's blind." Jennifer's voice came from behind us. She had been wheeled out in a wheelchair, looking exhausted but determined. "We can't raise a burden like that. We have our lives to think about." I stared at them both, unable to process what I was hearing. "A burden? He's your son. He's a baby who needs you." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Mom, you don't understand. Jennifer and I have careers, plans. We can't sacrifice everything for a disabled child who will never be able to take care of himself." "He's 3 hours old," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You don't know what he'll be capable of. Blind people live full, independent lives. They have families, careers." "Not our problem," Jennifer said coldly, not even looking at the baby in the nurse's arms. "We've already made our decision. We're surrendering him to the state." The nurse looked horrified. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, perhaps you should take some time to think about this. Postpartum emotions can be overwhelming, and there are support groups, financial assistance." "We don't need time," Ronan snapped. "We need the paperwork. Where do we sign?" I stepped forward, reaching for my grandson. "Let me hold him. Please, just let me hold him." The nurse, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, gently placed the baby in my arms. He was so small, so perfect. His little face was peaceful, his tiny fingers curled into fists. He couldn't have weighed more than 6 pounds. When I looked down at him, he turned his head slightly toward my voice, and I felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. "Look at him," I whispered to Ronan. "He's beautiful. He's your son." "He's defective," Ronan said flatly. "And we're not equipped to deal with that." I felt tears streaming down my face as I held this innocent child who had already been rejected by the 2 people who should love him most. "Then I'll take him. I'll raise him myself." Jennifer laughed, actually laughed. "You? You're 67 years old, Marjorie. You live on Social Security and work part-time cleaning offices. You can barely take care of yourself." "I raised Ronan just fine," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Exactly," Ronan replied, and the venom in his voice cut deeper than any physical blow could have. "Look how that turned out. You were never around, always working, always tired. I'm not putting a child through what I went through, especially not a disabled child who needs constant attention." The baby in my arms stirred slightly, and I adjusted the blue blanket around him. He was so trusting, so vulnerable. "Ronan, please." "No." He turned to the nurse. "We want him placed in state care immediately. Today." The nurse looked between us, clearly torn. "Sir, I have to inform you that once you sign the relinquishment papers, the decision is permanent. There's a waiting period, but—" "How long?" Jennifer asked. 72 hours, but I really encourage you to speak with a counselor first." "We don't need counseling," Ronan said. "We need this done quickly and quietly." I clutched my grandson closer to my chest. "I won't let you do this. I'll fight for him. I'll get a lawyer." Ronan's expression turned dangerous. "You'll do no such thing. You have no legal standing here, and if you try to interfere, I'll make sure you never see him at all." "He's my grandson. He's nothing," Jennifer said coldly. "He's a mistake we're correcting before it ruins our lives." The nurse finally intervened. "I think everyone needs to take a step back. This is a hospital, and we need to keep voices down. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, I'll have someone from social services come speak with you about your options." "Mrs. Patterson, I'm his grandmother." She nodded sympathetically. "Mrs. Patterson, perhaps you could spend some time with the baby while your son and daughter-in-law speak with the counselor." For a brief moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker across Ronan's face. But Jennifer reached over and squeezed his hand, and whatever softness might have been there vanished. "We don't need our son spending time with the baby," Jennifer said. "It will only make this harder than it needs to be." "Spending time with his grandmother, you mean?" I corrected, my voice steel. "Whatever," Jennifer said with a dismissive wave. "We want the baby taken to the nursery while we handle the paperwork." The nurse gently took my grandson from my arms, and I felt like a piece of my soul was being ripped away. "What will you name him?" she asked softly. "We're not naming him," Ronan said. "That's for his new family to decide." But I leaned down and whispered in the baby's ear, "Your name is David, David Patterson, and your grandmother loves you more than anything in this world." As the nurse walked away with David, I turned back to Ronan and Jennifer. "You'll regret this for the rest of your lives." "The only thing I regret," Ronan said, "is that it took this long to realize what kind of mother you really are. This is exactly what I expected from you. Drama, guilt trips, trying to make everything about yourself instead of what's best for everyone involved." I stared at my son, this man I had sacrificed everything to raise, who now stood before me with such coldness that I barely recognized him. "What's best? You're abandoning your newborn son because he can't see. What kind of people does that make you?" "Practical people," Jennifer answered. "People who understand that some burdens aren't worth carrying." I felt something inside me break, but also harden. "If you do this, if you abandon David, you're dead to me, both of you." Ronan shrugged. "Fine by me. Maybe now you'll stop trying to control everyone's life and focus on your own pathetic existence." I turned and walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. But as I reached the elevator, I heard Jennifer call out, "Oh, and Marjorie? Don't bother looking for him. We're having him transferred to a facility in another state. You'll never find him." The elevator doors closed, and I broke down completely. I cried for David, for the innocence he had already lost, for the family that had rejected him before giving him a chance. But underneath the grief, something else was growing, a determination I hadn't felt in years. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let my grandson disappear into the system, forgotten and unloved. I had failed Ronan somehow, had raised a son who could abandon his own child, but I wouldn't fail David. I drove home to my small apartment, the silence deafening. My Social Security check was $850 a month. I made an extra $200 a week cleaning offices downtown. It wasn't much, but it was something. I would save every penny if I had to. I would find David, no matter how long it took or how much it cost me. I would not let him grow up believing that no one wanted him, that he wasn't worth fighting for, because he was worth everything to me. 3 months had passed since David disappeared into the foster care system, and I had visited 17 different facilities across 3 states. My small savings account, which had once held $3,000, was down to $800. Every week, I sent $200 from my cleaning job straight into my search fund, leaving me with barely enough for rent and groceries. My apartment had become a war room. The kitchen table was covered with manila folders, each one representing a different shelter, foster home, or adoption agency. I had created a detailed map on my living room wall, marking every location I had visited with red pins. The unmarked territories stared back at me like accusations, reminding me how much ground I still had to cover. The phone calls were the worst part. Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I would begin calling agencies, pretending to be a potential volunteer, a concerned neighbor, or sometimes just a grandmother hoping to find information about adoption procedures. Most of the time, I was met with polite but firm rejection. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we cannot provide information about specific children in our care," the voice on the other end would say. Always professional, always final. "But he's my grandson," I would plead. "His parents abandoned him, and I just want to know if he's okay." If you're a blood relative, you would need to go through proper legal channels. Have you contacted a family law attorney? I had contacted 3 attorneys. Each consultation cost me $200 I didn't have, and each one told me the same thing. Without proof of abuse or neglect by the birth parents, and without being named as a preferred guardian before the relinquishment, I had no legal standing. Ronan and Jennifer had made sure their surrender was airtight, but I wasn't giving up. On Tuesday mornings, I cleaned offices at Patterson and Associates downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was cleaning the office building that bore my ex-husband's family name, though it had nothing to do with him. The work was harder than it used to be. My knees ached when I knelt to scrub baseboards, and my hands cramped from gripping the mop handle too tightly, but every dollar mattered. Mrs. Chen, who managed the cleaning crew, had noticed my dedication. "Marjorie, you're working too hard," she said one morning as I finished mopping the lobby. "You look tired. Maybe take some days off." I couldn't tell her that taking days off meant less money for gas to drive to the next county, less money for the copies of documents I needed to make, less money for the cheap motel rooms when the drives were too long to make in one day. "I'm fine," I told her, forcing a smile. "I need the hours." She studied my face with concern. "Your grandson, he is still missing." Mrs. Chen was the only person who knew about my search. I had confided in her during a particularly difficult week when I had driven 4 hours to a foster home in Ohio, only to discover they had never housed any blind infants. "I'm getting close," I lied. "I have some good leads." That afternoon, I drove to Hamilton County Children's Services, my 19th attempt. The building was newer than most of the others I had visited, with large windows and cheerful artwork in the lobby. A young woman named Sarah met with me in a small conference room that smelled of coffee and old carpet. "I'm looking for information about volunteer opportunities," I began, using the script I had perfected. "Specifically, I'm interested in helping families with visually impaired children." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. We always need volunteers with specialized experience. Do you have a background working with blind children?" I hesitated for just a moment. I have a personal connection to the community. My grandson was born with vision problems, and I want to help other families going through similar challenges." "That's really admirable," Sarah said, pulling out a volunteer application. "What kind of vision problems does your grandson have?" My throat tightened. He was born completely blind, but his parents, they weren't able to care for him. He was placed for adoption. Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry. That must be incredibly difficult for your family." "It is," I admitted, and for the first time in months I wasn't lying or manipulating. "I just want to make sure he ended up somewhere good, with people who understand his needs." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "If you don't mind me asking, how long ago did this happen?" 3 months ago. He was born in February at St. Mary's Hospital. I watched Sarah's face carefully, looking for any flicker of recognition. She was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "Marjorie, if this is about finding your grandson, I need to be honest with you. I can't provide specific information about children in care. But—" My heart stopped. But what? "But I can tell you that any baby placed in our system, especially one with special needs, would be prioritized for placement with families who have experience and resources to provide appropriate care." "So he would be placed quickly?" Sarah nodded. "Usually within 30 to 60 days, especially for infants. Families who are specifically looking to adopt children with disabilities often have shorter waiting periods. 60 days. It had been 3 months since David was abandoned. If Sarah was right, he might already be with a family, possibly even legally adopted by now. "Are the adoptions usually local?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sometimes. But we work with agencies across the region. A child placed here might be adopted by a family in Kentucky, Indiana, even further if it's the right match." I felt my hope deflating. The region could mean hundreds of miles, thousands of families. I had been searching systematically, county by county, but if adoptions happened across state lines. "Is there any way to know if a child was successfully placed?" I asked desperately. Sarah looked at me with genuine sympathy. "I wish I could help you more. I can see how much you care. But the privacy laws exist to protect the children and their new families." I nodded, understanding but not accepting. What if the grandmother wanted to establish contact? Not to interfere, just to know he's okay? In some cases, adoptive families are open to maintaining connections with birth families, especially grandparents. But that would have to be arranged before the adoption was finalized, and both sets of parents would need to agree. Both sets of parents. Ronan and Jennifer would never agree to let me have contact with David. They had made that clear from the beginning. I left Hamilton County with another dead end, but also with new information. If David had been adopted, it might be through an agency that specialized in special needs children. That narrowed my search considerably. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a new list I had compiled from internet research. Agencies within a 3-state radius that focused on adopting children with disabilities. There were 12 of them. Tomorrow, I would start calling. But first, I needed to count my money again. $420 left in my search fund. Gas to visit agencies cost approximately $40 per trip if they were within 2 hours' drive. Longer trips meant overnight stays, which could cost up to $80 for a cheap motel. I could afford maybe 10 more search trips before I would need to find additional income or wait until I saved more money. The thought of waiting was unbearable. I picked up my reading glasses to study the map more carefully, but one of the lenses had cracked sometime during the day. Everything looked slightly distorted, like the world was broken in half. I set them down and rubbed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. My phone rang, startling me out of my calculations. The caller ID showed my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Marjorie, honey, are you okay? I saw your lights on very late again last night." Mrs. Rodriguez was 73 and had lived in the apartment next to mine for 8 years. She had noticed my odd schedules and frequent absences, but had been polite enough not to ask too many questions. "I'm fine, Elena. Just having trouble sleeping. You look so thin lately. Are you eating enough? I made too much arroz con pollo tonight if you want some." The kindness in her voice almost broke me. I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten a real meal instead of crackers and peanut butter. "That's very sweet, but I'm not very hungry. Marjorie, is there something wrong? You seem different these past few months, sadder." I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to tell her everything. Elena had raised 4 children and had 11 grandchildren. She would understand the desperation, the need to protect family, but she would also try to talk me out of my search, would tell me to accept what couldn't be changed. "I'm just dealing with some family issues," I said carefully. "Family can be complicated," she agreed. But sometimes we have to choose what battles are worth fighting and which ones will only hurt us more. After I hung up, I stared at my cracked glasses and Elena's unintentional wisdom. Was this search destroying me? I had lost weight, lost sleep, spent money I couldn't afford to spend. My knees hurt constantly from the extra cleaning shifts, and I had developed a persistent cough that I kept telling myself would go away on its own. But then I thought about David, barely 3 months old, possibly lying in a crib somewhere without knowing that someone was fighting for him. Someone loved him enough to sacrifice everything to find him. I picked up my cracked glasses and put them back on. The world might look broken, but I could still see well enough to keep searching. Tomorrow, I would call the specialized adoption agencies. If that didn't work, I would expand my search to neighboring states. I would work extra shifts, eat less, drive further. I would find David, even if it killed me. 2 years and 8 months after David disappeared, I finally found him. It happened on a rainy Thursday in October, when I had almost given up hope. I was sitting in the waiting room of Bright Futures Adoption Services in Louisville, Kentucky, my 29th official visit to an agency. My savings were completely depleted, and I had been living on peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee for weeks. The extra cleaning shifts had taken their toll. My back ached constantly, and I had developed arthritis in my hands that made gripping the mop handle painful. But something about Bright Futures felt different from the moment I walked through their doors. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Carol, had kind eyes and didn't immediately shut down my questions about volunteer opportunities. "We're always looking for volunteers who understand the challenges our families face," she said, reviewing my hastily filled-out application. "You mentioned having personal experience with visual impairment in your family." I had perfected my story over nearly 3 years of searching. My grandson was born blind and placed for adoption. I want to help other families who might be struggling with similar decisions. Carol's expression shifted slightly. "When was your grandson placed?" "February of 2019. He was born at St. Mary's Hospital." She was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath. I had learned to read the subtle signs, the slight pause before a polite rejection, the way people's faces closed off when they realized I was searching for a specific child rather than genuinely volunteering. But Carol surprised me. "Would you mind waiting here for just a moment? I'd like you to speak with our director, Mrs. Hamilton." My heart began racing as Carol disappeared down a hallway lined with photos of happy families. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, she returned with an elegant woman in her 50s who wore a warm but cautious smile. "Mrs. Patterson? I'm Linda Hamilton. Carol tells me you're interested in volunteering with families who have visually impaired children." "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's very important to me." Mrs. Hamilton studied my face carefully. "Would you mind if we spoke privately in my office?" I followed her down the hallway, past more photos of adopted children and their families. Her office was comfortable and warm, with soft lighting and plants on every surface. She gestured for me to sit in a chair across from her desk. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve honesty," she said, folding her hands on her desk. "Are you looking for a specific child?" The question caught me off guard. After years of careful deception and practiced lies, someone was asking me outright. I stared at her for a moment, then decided to tell the truth. "My grandson," I whispered. "My son and daughter-in-law abandoned him because he was born blind. I've been searching for him for almost 3 years." Mrs. Hamilton nodded slowly. "What can you tell me about the circumstances of his placement?" I told her everything. The hospital scene, Ronan and Jennifer's cruelty, the legal roadblocks I had encountered. Mrs. Hamilton listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled as I continued. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me," she said when I finished. "Are you looking to disrupt an adoption? To take this child away from a family who has legally adopted him?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I just want to know that he's okay, that he's loved and cared for. But if you found him, what would you do?" I had been so focused on the search itself that I had never really considered what would happen if I actually succeeded. I don't know, I admitted. I suppose I hoped. I hoped maybe I could be part of his life somehow. Not to take him away from good parents, but just to love him, to make sure he knows he has family who wanted him. Mrs. Hamilton was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing a decision that could change everything. Finally, she spoke. We did place a blind infant from St. Mary's Hospital in February of 2019, she said carefully. He was adopted by a wonderful family who specifically requested a child with special needs. They had been waiting for 2 years for the right match. My vision blurred with tears. Is he? Is he healthy? Happy? He's thriving, Mrs. Hamilton said with a gentle smile. His parents are both teachers who work with special needs children. They were fully prepared for his needs and have provided him with every resource and support available. Relief flooded through me so completely that I began sobbing. After nearly 3 years of searching, of not knowing if David was safe or loved or even alive, I finally had an answer. He was okay. He was more than okay. He was thriving. His name is David now, Mrs. Hamilton continued. David Chen. His parents, Michael and Susan Chen, chose to keep the first name because they felt it was important to honor whatever his birth family had called him, David Chen. My grandson had a new name, a new family, a new life. Can you tell me more about them? The Chens? Mrs. Hamilton hesitated. Mrs. Patterson, I'm already sharing more than I should. Client confidentiality is extremely important in our field. Please, I begged. I've spent every dollar I had looking for him. I've worked myself to exhaustion. I just need to know he's in good hands. Something in my voice must have convinced her, because she opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Michael Chen is a special education teacher at Roosevelt Elementary. Susan Chen teaches music therapy at a center for visually impaired children. They had been trying to have children for 8 years before deciding to adopt. They went through 18 months of training and preparation specifically to adopt a blind child. My heart ached with gratitude and loss simultaneously. David had found exactly the family he needed, the family I could never have been. Are they? Do they love him? Mrs. Hamilton smiled. Mrs. Patterson, I've been in this business for 22 years, and I've never seen parents more devoted to a child. They moved to a single-story house with a fenced yard specifically for David. They learned Braille together before he was even walking. Susan reduced her work hours to spend more time with him. Does he know he's adopted? He's only 3 years old. But yes, adoption is discussed openly in their home. The Chens believe strongly in honesty appropriate to a child's developmental stage. 3 years old. My grandson was 3 years old, and I had never held him again after that day in the hospital. What is he like? Mrs. Hamilton's expression softened. He's remarkable, Mrs. Patterson. He's incredibly verbal for his age, loves music, and has an extraordinary memory. He knows the names of dozens of birds just from their songs. He can navigate their entire house independently, and he's already showing interest in Braille books. Pride swelled in my chest, followed immediately by devastating sadness. I was proud of this child I had never really known, grateful for the life he had been given, and heartbroken that I wasn't part of it. Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something else, Mrs. Hamilton said, her tone becoming more serious. What are your intentions now that you know where David is? I wiped my eyes and tried to think clearly. I don't know. I never thought past finding him. Because I need to be very clear about something. David's adoption was finalized 8 months ago. The Chens are his legal parents in every sense. Any attempt to contact them or disrupt their family could be considered harassment. The warning was gentle but firm. I had found David, but I couldn't reach him. Could I just see him? From a distance? Just to know for myself that he's okay? Mrs. Hamilton studied me for a long time. Mrs. Patterson, I understand your need for closure, but you need to think very carefully about what you're asking. If you see him, will you be able to walk away? I didn't answer because I didn't know. After 3 years of searching, of sacrificing everything to find him. Could I really just walk away? "Where do they live?" I asked quietly. "I can't give you their address," Mrs. Hamilton said firmly. "But I can tell you they live in Riverside County, about 40 minutes from here." Riverside County. After 34 months of searching across multiple states, David was less than an hour away from where I sat. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to go home and think about this carefully," Mrs. Hamilton said, standing up from her desk. "David has a good life with people who love him deeply. You found what you were looking for, the knowledge that he's safe and loved. Sometimes that has to be enough." I nodded and stood to leave, but I turned back at the door. "Mrs. Hamilton, why did you tell me all this? You could have just said you couldn't help me." She smiled sadly. "Because I'm a grandmother too. I understand what it means to love a child that much. But I also know that sometimes love means letting go." I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with everything I had learned. David was alive, healthy, loved, and thriving with parents who could give him everything he needed. It was more than I had dared to hope for during my darkest moments of searching. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I had found my grandson, but I hadn't seen him. I hadn't heard his voice or watched him laugh or made sure for myself that the life Mrs. Hamilton described was real. I knew it was selfish. I knew it was dangerous. But I had to see David with my own eyes. Just once. Then maybe I could let go. I spent 3 sleepless nights researching Riverside County before I worked up the courage to drive there. Online property records led me to Michael and Susan Chen, both 34 years old, who had purchased a ranch-style home on Maple Street in August of 2019, just 6 months after David's adoption. The house cost them $230,000, according to public records, which meant they had likely stretched their finances to create a safe environment for their son. Their home was exactly what Mrs. Hamilton had described: single-story, with a large fenced yard and what appeared to be raised garden beds along the driveway. Even from the street, I could see that every detail had been chosen with David's needs in mind. The walkway to the front door was made of textured concrete that would be easy to navigate by touch, and wind chimes hung from the front porch, probably to help David orient himself when playing outside. I parked 3 houses down on a Tuesday morning, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. What was I doing? Mrs. Hamilton's warnings echoed in my mind, but I couldn't drive away. Not yet. At 10:30, the front door opened and a woman emerged carrying a small backpack and holding the hand of a little boy. My breath caught in my throat. Even from 50 yards away, I knew immediately that this was David. He was small for 3 years old, with dark hair and the same serious expression he had worn as a newborn. He walked confidently beside the woman, Susan, I assumed, his free hand trailing along a rope that had been strung along the edge of the driveway. When they reached the sidewalk, he let go of her hand and walked slightly ahead, using a small white cane that had been modified for his height. I watched, mesmerized, as they made their way down the street. David moved with purpose and confidence, stopping occasionally to listen to sounds around him: a dog barking, a car engine, birds singing in the trees. When a neighbor called out a greeting, he waved in the correct direction and responded with a clear, "Good morning, Mrs. Foster." They were heading toward a small park I had noticed at the end of the street. I waited until they were out of sight, then started my car and slowly drove past their house, trying to absorb every detail. Children's artwork was taped to the front window, and I could see what looked like a piano through the open living room curtains. A basketball hoop had been mounted lower than usual on the garage door, probably so David could learn to shoot by sound. I parked at the other end of the street and walked to the park, staying far enough away to remain unnoticed, but close enough to observe. Susan sat on a bench while David explored the playground equipment. He moved carefully but fearlessly, using his hands to map out each piece of equipment before climbing or sliding. "David, stay where I can hear you," Susan called out, and he immediately responded, "I'm on the swings, Mama." Mama, the word pierced through me like a knife. This woman wasn't his mother. I was his grandmother, and somewhere Ronan was his father, even if he had abandoned that role. But watching Susan's attentive posture, The way she anticipated David's needs without hovering, the genuine affection in her voice when she spoke to him, I realized that biology meant nothing here. Susan was his mother in every way that mattered. I stayed for 45 minutes, watching David play with an independence and joy that took my breath away. When another child approached the swings, David immediately introduced himself and asked if the other boy wanted to take turns. He was social, confident, and clearly loved. As they prepared to leave the park, I heard Susan say, "Should we stop at the library on our way home? Ms. Patricia said she has some new Braille books for you." "Yes," David said excitedly. "Can we get the one about the train conductor?" "We can ask," Susan replied, taking his hand as they left the playground. I followed at a distance as they walked to the Riverside Branch Library 2 blocks away. Through the large windows, I watched Susan help David navigate to the children's section, where a librarian, presumably Ms. Patricia, greeted them both by name. She handed David a small book, and he immediately began running his fingers across the cover, his face lighting up with delight. This was David's world, neighbors who knew his name, librarians who saved special books for him, a mother who anticipated his interests and supported his independence. It was everything I had hoped for during my 3-year search, everything I could never have given him myself. But watching wasn't enough. I needed to hear his voice, to see his smile up close, to somehow become part of this world he had built without me. I waited until the following Thursday, then returned to the library during what I had determined was their regular visit time. This time, instead of watching from outside, I went in. The children's section was nearly empty except for Susan, David, and Ms. Patricia. I browsed the large print books nearby, straining to hear their conversation. "This book is about a boy who builds a boat," Ms. Patricia was telling David. "He uses different materials to see which ones float the best." "Like an experiment?" David asked, his voice bright with curiosity. "Exactly like an experiment. Your mama tells me you've been doing experiments in your garden." David nodded eagerly. "We planted seeds in different soils to see which ones grow fastest. The ones in the dark dirt are winning, but Mama says the race isn't over yet." I smiled despite myself. Of course, Susan was teaching him science through hands-on experiments. Of course, she was nurturing his natural curiosity in ways that worked with his learning style rather than against it. "Should we check out this book and the train conductor story?" Susan asked. "Yes, please. And Mama, can we read them when we get home?" "Of course, sweetheart, but remember, after lunch is quiet time." "I know. I like quiet time because I can practice my piano songs." They moved toward the checkout desk, and I impulsively followed, still pretending to browse nearby shelves. As Ms. Patricia scanned David's books, he turned slightly in my direction. "Someone smells like lavender," he said to Susan. "It's nice." My heart stopped. Lavender was the scent of the hand lotion I had been using for years. David couldn't see me, but somehow he had noticed my presence. Susan glanced around and spotted me. "Excuse me," she said politely. "My son was commenting on your lovely perfume." I froze, unsure how to respond. This was the closest I had been to David since the day he was born, and I was terrified that my voice would give me away somehow. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Lavender is my favorite." David smiled in my direction. "My Grandma Rose used to wear lavender before she died. Mama says smells can remind us of people we love." Grandma Rose. Susan's mother, presumably. David had a grandmother he remembered fondly, someone who had loved him and left happy memories. It should have comforted me to know he wasn't missing that relationship, but instead, it highlighted how much I had lost. "That's very wise," I said, my voice barely steady. "Your grandmother sounds like she was special." "She was," David said matter-of-factly. "She taught me how to tell different flowers apart by smelling them. Want me to show you?" Before Susan could intervene, David had walked over to a small display of artificial flowers near the children's area. He picked up different ones, smelling each carefully. "This one is supposed to be a rose, but it doesn't smell right," he announced. "Real roses smell sweeter and have more layers, and this one is supposed to be a daisy, but daisies don't really have much smell unless you get really close." I watched this remarkable little boy demonstrate knowledge and confidence that most children his age wouldn't possess. "You're very smart," I said, meaning it completely. "David knows more about flowers than most adult gardeners," Susan said proudly. "He's teaching me." David beamed at the praise, and I felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. He was loved, praised, encouraged to share his knowledge and interests. He was thriving in ways I had only dreamed of during my desperate search. "We should head home for lunch," Susan said gently, gathering David's books. "It was nice to meet you," David said in my direction, even though we hadn't been formally introduced. "It was nice to meet you too," I replied, fighting back tears. As they left the library, David walking confidently beside Susan with his small white cane, I realized I was facing an impossible decision. I had found David, confirmed that he was safe and loved and thriving. Mrs. Hamilton had been right. This should be enough. I should walk away now, satisfied that my search had ended with the best possible outcome. But standing there in the library, having heard David's laugh and witnessed his curiosity, and felt his immediate friendliness toward a stranger, I knew I couldn't let this be the end. I wasn't ready to be just a memory of lavender perfume. I wanted more. I wanted to be part of his life. The question was whether that desire was love or selfishness, and whether acting on it would help David or destroy the beautiful life he had built with his real family. I drove home that afternoon torn between satisfaction and longing. David was everything I had hoped he would become: smart, confident, loved, and happy. The Chens were everything I had hoped his adoptive parents would be: devoted, knowledgeable, and completely committed to his well-being. I should be grateful. I should be at peace. But I wasn't ready to disappear from his life before I had ever really been in it. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter I wasn't sure I would ever send. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Chen, you don't know me, but I am David's biological grandmother. I have been searching for him for 3 years, and I recently learned that he was adopted through Bright Futures. I want you to know that I am not writing to disrupt your family or to make any claims on David. I can see that he is thriving in your care, and I am grateful beyond words that he found you. I am writing because I hope there might be a possibility, however small, that I could be part of David's life in some way, not as a replacement for any relationships he already has, but as an additional person who loves him and wants to support his growth and happiness. I understand if this request is unwelcome or impossible. I understand that you owe me nothing and that David's well-being must come first. But if you would be willing to meet with me to discuss the possibility, I would be forever grateful. Sincerely, Marjorie Patterson." I stared at the letter for hours, weighing every word. Sending it would change everything, for better or worse. Not sending it meant walking away from David forever, accepting that our brief encounter in the library would be the only real moment we would ever share. By midnight, I still hadn't decided what to do. I mailed the letter on a Friday morning, 3 days after writing it. My hands shook as I dropped the envelope into the mailbox outside the post office, and I immediately regretted my decision. What if the Chens called the police? What if they thought I was some kind of stalker who had been watching their son? What if they moved away to protect David from me? But it was too late. The letter was gone, carrying my hopes and fears to a family who had no reason to trust me. I waited 5 agonizing days before the phone rang. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Susan Chen." My heart stopped. Her voice was calm but cautious, neither friendly nor hostile. I gripped the phone tighter. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you would." "Your letter was unexpected," Susan said carefully. "Michael and I have talked about it extensively, and we have some questions." "Of course. I'll answer anything you want to know." There was a pause, then Susan continued. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to understand your motivations." David's birth parents made it very clear that they wanted no contact with him ever again. They signed papers specifically stating that no biological family members should be allowed access. The words hit me like a slap. That wasn't my decision. I fought against what they did from the very beginning. "Can you tell us exactly what happened?" We were told that David was surrendered because his parents weren't prepared to care for a special needs child, but we weren't given details about other family members. I took a deep breath and told Susan everything: the hospital scene, my confrontation with Ronan and Jennifer, their threats to keep me away from David, my 3-year search. As I spoke, I could hear the pain in my own voice, the years of frustration and heartbreak spilling out to a woman who owed me nothing. Susan listened without interrupting until I finished. Then she was quiet for a long time. "Mrs. Patterson, that must have been incredibly difficult," she said finally, and I could hear genuine sympathy in her voice. "Michael and I had no idea that you existed or that you had been searching for David. I understand if you don't want me in his life," I said quickly. I needed you to know that someone else loved him from the beginning, that he wasn't unwanted by everyone." "Where have you been living during this search?" Susan asked, surprising me with the question. "Here in Louisville. I never moved because I hoped if David ever wanted to find his birth family, maybe he would start here." Another pause. "Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to meet with Michael and me? Without David at first. We need to discuss this situation face to face before we can make any decisions." Hope flared in my chest, dangerous and bright. "Yes, absolutely. Whenever and wherever you want. Tomorrow afternoon? There's a coffee shop called Miller's on Main Street in Riverside. Do you know it?" "I'll find it. 2 o'clock, and Mrs. Patterson. Please understand that we're not promising anything. We need to protect David first and foremost." "I understand completely." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, hardly able to believe what had just happened. The Chens were willing to meet with me. They hadn't called the police or threatened legal action. They were at least considering the possibility that I could be part of David's life. I spent the rest of the day in a nervous frenzy, changing clothes 3 times and rehearsing what I would say. I wanted to present myself as stable, trustworthy, someone who would enhance David's life rather than complicate it. Miller's coffee shop was a small, cozy place with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the corner where we could talk privately. At exactly 2 o'clock, a couple entered who I immediately recognized as David's parents. Michael Chen was tall and lean with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Susan was petite with short brown hair and a warm but cautious expression. They both looked exactly like the type of people who would devote their lives to teaching and caring for children with special needs. "Mrs. Patterson?" Susan asked as they approached my table. "Please, call me Marjorie," I said, standing to shake their hands. "Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me." We sat down, and there was an awkward moment of silence before Michael spoke. "Marjorie, we want to be honest with you about our concerns." I nodded, bracing myself. "David is thriving," he continued. "He's confident, happy, and secure in his identity as our son. We worry about introducing confusion into his life, especially regarding the circumstances of his adoption." "I would never want to confuse him," I said quickly. "I don't expect him to see me as a grandmother in the way he might remember your mother, Susan. I just want him to know that there are people in his biological family who love him." Susan leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell us about your son? About why he and his wife made the decision they did?" This was the hardest part. How could I explain Ronan's cruelty without making David feel rejected all over again? "My son has always been focused on appearances and success," I said carefully. "When David was born with a disability, Ronan couldn't see past that to the wonderful child David would become. It was their loss, completely." "Do you think your son might change his mind someday?" Michael asked. "Try to contact David or disrupt his life?" I shook my head firmly. "No. Ronan burned that bridge completely. He and Jennifer wanted nothing to do with David, and they made that very clear. They wouldn't even let me tell them his name." "His name?" Susan looked puzzled. "David. I whispered it to him in the hospital before the nurse took him away. When Mrs. Hamilton told me you had kept that name, My voice broke slightly. It meant everything to me. Susan's expression softened. We felt strongly that he should keep whatever name his birth family had chosen. It was one of the few things we could honor from his earliest life. I wiped my eyes, embarrassed by the emotion. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be dramatic. I've wondered about him every single day for 3 years. Michael and Susan exchanged a look, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Then Susan spoke. Marjorie, we need to ask you some practical questions. Do you have any history of mental illness, substance abuse, or criminal activity? I understood why they needed to know. No, nothing like that. I've worked the same cleaning job for 8 years. I've lived in the same apartment for 12 years. I can provide references if you need them. What are your expectations if we allow you to have contact with David? Michael asked. I had thought about this question constantly since mailing the letter. I don't expect anything specific. I understand that you're his parents and that your decisions about his life come first. I suppose I just hope to be someone in his life who loves him unconditionally, who can tell him stories about his early life, and maybe share things about his biological heritage that might interest him someday. And if he doesn't want a relationship with you? Susan asked gently but firmly. The question hurt, but I had considered it. Then I would respect that completely. David's happiness is what matters most to me. Michael was quiet for a moment, then said, Can you tell us about the lavender perfume? I blinked, confused. I'm sorry? David came home from the library last week talking about a nice lady who smelled like his Grandma Rose, Susan explained. He was very taken with your kindness to him. Heat flooded my face. They knew I had approached David in the library. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have spoken to him without your permission. When he mentioned the lavender, I couldn't help responding. You didn't identify yourself? Michael asked. No. We just talked about flowers for a few minutes. Susan smiled for the first time since they had arrived. David has been asking us if we might run into you again at the library. He said you seemed lonely, and he wanted to tell you more about flower gardens. My heart swelled. Even in a brief interaction, David had sensed something about me that made him want to help. This child who had every reason to be wary of strangers was instead concerned about my well-being. Marjorie, Susan said, Michael and I need some time to discuss this privately. But I want you to know that we're not opposed to the idea of you being part of David's life in some capacity. We just need to figure out how to do it in a way that's healthy for everyone involved, especially David. What would that process look like? I asked. Slowly, Michael replied. If we decide to move forward, we would start with supervised visits. You and David would spend time together while Susan or I are present. If that goes well over a period of time, we might consider expanding the arrangement. And we would need to discuss with David in age-appropriate ways who you are and why you want to be part of his life, Susan added. We believe in honesty, but we also want to protect his emotional security. I nodded eagerly. That sounds perfect. More than I had hoped for. We'll call you by the end of the week, Michael said, standing up. We need to think about this carefully and probably consult with David's therapist about the best approach. David had a therapist. Of course he did. The Chens weren't just loving parents. They were thoughtful, thorough people who made sure David had every resource he needed to thrive. Thank you, I said as we prepared to part ways. Thank you for even considering this. Susan paused at the door. Marjorie, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were searching for David all these years, what kept you going? What made you believe it was worth the sacrifice? I thought for a moment. The belief that every child deserves to know they're loved unconditionally by someone. David didn't choose to be born to parents who couldn't love him for who he was, but he also didn't deserve to grow up thinking that no one in his biological family wanted him. Susan nodded slowly. That's a beautiful reason. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope mixed with peace. Even if the Chens decided that contact wasn't appropriate, they now knew that David had a grandmother who loved him. They could tell him someday, when he was old enough to understand, that he hadn't been unwanted by everyone. But deep in my heart, I believed they would say yes. I had seen the way they looked at each other during our conversation, the careful consideration they were giving to my request. These were people who understood love in all its forms, who wouldn't deny David a relationship that could enrich his life. 3 days later, Susan called. "Marjorie, we'd like to invite you to dinner on Sunday. David doesn't know who you are yet, but we told him we were having a friend over who loves gardens as much as he does." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much. "We'll start slow," Susan warned. "And if at any point we feel this isn't working for David, we'll need to reconsider." "I understand completely. Sunday at 5 o'clock. And Marjorie, you might want to bring some seeds or bulbs to plant with David. He's been asking about starting a winter garden." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and cried tears of joy and relief. In 4 days, I would have dinner with my grandson. I would hear his voice, watch him eat, maybe even help him plant flowers. It had taken 3 years, $15,000, and nearly destroying my health, but I had found David. More importantly, I had found a way to love him without disrupting the beautiful life he had built with his real family. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. 6 months had passed since that first dinner with David, and I had never been happier. The Chens had gradually allowed me to become a regular part of David's life. Sunday dinners, Saturday morning garden work, occasional trips to the library or park. David knew me as Grandma Marjorie, and while he understood that I was different from his Grandma Rose, he had accepted me with the easy affection that came naturally to him. We had planted a winter garden together, just as Susan had suggested that first day. David could identify every herb and vegetable by smell and touch, and he took pride in showing visitors what we had grown together. On this particular Saturday morning, we were harvesting the last of the fall lettuce when everything changed. I was kneeling in the dirt, helping David feel for the best leaves to pick, when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Susan was inside making lunch, and Michael was at his school for weekend tutoring sessions. We weren't expecting anyone. "Grandma Marjorie, someone's here," David said, tilting his head toward the sound of footsteps on the front walkway. I stood up, brushing soil from my knees, and froze. Walking toward us with determined strides was Ronan, followed by a woman I didn't recognize. My son looked exactly the same. Tall, well-dressed, wearing the same expression of barely controlled anger I remembered from the hospital 4 years ago. "David, let's go inside," I said quickly, but Ronan's voice cut across the yard before we could move. "So this is where you've been hiding him." David pressed closer to my side, confused by the harsh tone in the stranger's voice. "Grandma Marjorie, who is that man?" My heart pounded as I put my arm around David protectively. "David, run inside and find your mama, okay? Tell her we have unexpected visitors." But Ronan was already approaching, his eyes locked on David with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The woman beside him, blonde, expensively dressed, probably his new wife, hung back slightly, clearly uncomfortable. "You can't be serious," Ronan said, stopping a few feet away from us. "You've been playing grandmother to my son behind my back?" "He's not your son," I said firmly, positioning myself between Ronan and David. "You gave up that right the day you abandoned him in a hospital." David's small hand found mine and gripped tightly. "Grandma Marjorie, I'm scared." "It's okay, sweetheart," I told him, my voice as calm as I could manage. "Just stay right here with me." Ronan's expression shifted as he really looked at David for the first time. I could see him taking in the confident posture, the healthy appearance, the obvious intelligence in David's face even though he couldn't see. This wasn't the burden Ronan had imagined. This was a thriving, remarkable child. He looks good," Ronan said, and I heard something like surprise in his voice. "He is good," I replied coldly. "No thanks to you." The front door opened, and Susan appeared, immediately assessing the situation. Her face went pale when she saw Ronan, but she walked quickly toward us with the protective determination of a mother defending her cub. "David, come here, baby," she said, extending her hand. But David didn't move. Instead, he pressed closer to me and said, "Mama, this man is scaring Grandma Marjorie." His voice sounds angry. Ronan stared at David, calling Susan Mama, and I saw something flicker across his face. Jealousy, maybe, or regret. But it was too late for regret. I'm David's biological father, Ronan announced, as if that title still carried weight. I've come to discuss his future. Susan's voice was ice cold. You're not listed on any of David's paperwork as having parental rights. You surrendered those voluntarily and permanently. I've changed my mind, Ronan said. I want him back. The words hung in the air like a threat. David's grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel him trembling slightly against my side. You can't have him back, I said, my voice louder than I intended. He has a family who loves him. You can't just waltz in here 4 years later and decide you want to be a father. Ronan's jaw clenched. I'm his biological father. I have rights. You have no rights, Susan said firmly. Michael and I adopted David legally. You signed papers relinquishing all claims to him. Those papers can be challenged. The blonde woman spoke for the first time. I'm Ronan's wife, Ashley. I'm also a family law attorney. There are circumstances under which adoption decrees can be overturned, particularly if there's evidence that the birth father was coerced or misled. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a spontaneous visit. They had come prepared for a legal battle. What do you want? I asked bluntly. Ronan looked at David again, and I could see him trying to reconcile the confident, happy child in front of him with whatever image he had carried in his mind. I want to get to know my son. I want to be part of his life. No. The word came from David himself, spoken clearly and firmly. He stepped slightly in front of me, his small body protective. I don't want to know you. You made Grandma Marjorie sad for a long time, and you're scaring my mama now. Go away. Ronan looked stunned. He had probably expected to find a broken child, grateful for any attention from a biological parent. Instead, he was facing a confident boy who saw right through him. David, I'm your real father, Ronan said, crouching down to David's level. I know I made mistakes, but I want to make them right. David tilted his head, listening not just to Ronan's words, but to his tone, his breathing, all the subtle cues that told him more about people than sight ever could. You don't sound sorry, he said matter-of-factly. You sound like you want something. Ashley stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, my husband is prepared to file a motion to overturn the adoption if necessary. But we'd prefer to work out a visitation arrangement voluntarily. Absolutely not, Susan said immediately. I wouldn't be so quick to refuse, Ashley continued. A biological father who was young and overwhelmed at the time of surrender, who has since matured and remarried, who can provide financial support and stability. Some judges might find that compelling. I felt sick. They were threatening to destroy David's entire world, to traumatize him with a custody battle, all because Ronan had suddenly decided he wanted to play father. Why now? I demanded, turning to face my son directly. Why, after 4 years, do you suddenly care about David? Ronan stood up, his composure slipping slightly. Ashley and I have been trying to have children. The doctors say it's unlikely we'll be able to conceive naturally. When I found out about David, about how well he's doing, you decided he might be useful to you after all, I finished, disgusted. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. My voice was rising, years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You threw away your son like garbage when you thought he would be inconvenient. Now that he's been raised by people who actually love him, you want to swoop in and claim credit. David was listening to everything, his face serious and thoughtful. Grandma Marjorie, he said quietly, tugging on my hand. Is this man really the one who didn't want me when I was a baby? The question hung in the air, and I saw Ronan flinch, but I wasn't going to lie to David to protect my son's feelings. Yes, sweetheart. This is the man who decided he couldn't love you because you're blind. David nodded slowly, then looked in Ronan's direction. I forgive you for that, he said, his voice clear and strong. But I don't need you to be my daddy. I already have a daddy who loves me just the way I am. Ronan's face went white. He had been rejected by a 4-year-old with more grace and wisdom than he had ever shown. David, Ashley said, trying a different approach. Wouldn't you like to have 2 families who love you? Your adoptive parents and your biological father? David considered this seriously, then shook his head. I only need one real family, and I already have that. Susan stepped forward and scooped David into her arms. We're going inside now. If you want to discuss this further, you can contact our attorney. But as she started to carry David toward the house, Ronan made a mistake that revealed his true character. He reached out and grabbed David's arm, trying to stop them from leaving. Wait, I have a right to talk to him. David cried out in fear and confusion, and Susan immediately held him tighter. Don't touch my son. That's when I saw red. All the years of searching, all the pain and sacrifice, all the love I had for this remarkable child crystallized into a fury I had never felt before. I stepped between Ronan and Susan, my voice deadly calm. If you ever touch David again, if you ever frighten him again, if you ever try to disrupt his life in any way, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. You can't threaten me, Ronan said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's not a threat, it's a promise. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo album, showing him pictures I had taken of David's adoption paperwork, of the surrender documents he had signed. I have copies of everything, Ronan. Every document that shows how eagerly you threw away your parental rights. Every record that proves you wanted nothing to do with David until he became convenient for you. Ashley's confidence faltered. Those records are sealed. From the public, yes, but not from family members who request them. It was a bluff, but a convincing one. I also have witness statements from hospital staff who remember how cruel you and Jennifer were to a newborn baby. I stepped closer to Ronan, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. Walk away now, and I'll keep quiet about what a pathetic excuse for a father you are. But if you put David through a custody battle, if you traumatize him in any way, I will make sure your new wife knows exactly what she married. Ronan's face went through several expressions: anger, fear, calculation. Finally, he looked at David one more time, seeing the way the child clung to Susan, the way he had clearly chosen his real family over his biological one. This isn't over, he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. Yes, it is, I replied firmly. You made your choice 4 years ago. Live with it. As Ronan and Ashley walked back to their car, David wiggled down from Susan's arms and came to stand beside me. Grandma Marjorie, are they going to try to take me away? I knelt down and took his hands in mine. No, sweetheart. Your mama and daddy won't let that happen. I won't let that happen. Good, he said simply, because I want to stay here with my real family, including you. We watched Ronan's car disappear down the street, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. I had protected David from the people who had abandoned him. I had found my place in his life without disrupting the family that had saved him. 3 years and countless sacrifices had led to this moment. Not a dramatic reunion or a fairy tale ending, but something better. A quiet victory. A family that chose love over biology, that protected each other from those who would cause harm. David slipped his small hand into mine. Can we finish picking the lettuce now, Grandma Marjorie? I want to show Papa Michael our garden when he gets home. Of course we can, sweetheart, I said, leading him back toward the garden where we had been working before the world had briefly tilted off its axis. As we knelt in the dirt together, David chattering about which vegetables would be ready to harvest next, I realized that this was exactly where I belonged. Not as David's rescuer or his replacement grandmother, but as someone who loved him unconditionally and would always protect him from those who would treat that love as anything less than precious. I had found my grandson. More importantly, I had found my place in the family he had chosen. The family that had chosen him back. It was enough. It was everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.